Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, here's a paradox that really got us thinking for this research. Despite, massive global investments, record high awareness campaigns, the global tide of mental illness, it just keeps rising.
It does.
And these huge treatment gaps aren't closing. It kind of feels like the way we're fighting this battle, well, it isn't winning the war.
That's an undeniable truth, really. And it forces us to face the limitations of the traditional approach.
Right.
When we focus purely on the clinical, the downstream model, treating individual disorders one person at a time, we just miss the bigger picture.
The forest for the trees, yeah.
Exactly. Mental health is tangled up with these big macro level things. So social conditions, economics, the environment we live in. It's fundamentally a public health outcome, not just an individual's biology or resilience.
That's precisely why our mission today is to dig into this fundamental paradigm shift. We want to move upstream, right, to address the causes of the causes. We're really hunting for the evidence showing how policy and power actually shape our mental well-being.
Yeah.
So we've pulled together research across 4 big areas: economic policy, the built environment, education, and the social fabric, to try and map out what structural change could look like.
And to do that, we're using the framework of the social and structural determinants of mental health, or SDOME.
Right, SDOME.
So basically, these are the non-medical factors, how money, power, resources are spread out, social norms all playing out in the places people actually live.
Okay.
Our task is to look beyond those immediate sort of individual living conditions and analyze the deeper upstream stuff, the policies, the economic systems that create those conditions in the first place.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit then. The shift in focus. We hear terms like, economic stability or neighborhood quality all the time. But how deep do these structural conditions really go?
Well, we need to look way beyond just individual factors, the structural drivers.
Yeah.
These are things like public policies, economic systems, deeply embedded social norms.
Okay.
Like, think about the dominant economic ideology, the focus on continuous growth, sometimes called neoliberalism.
Right.
Our sources suggest that when you prioritize growth above everything else, it can kind of chip away at social safety nets, increase job insecurity, maybe lead to more individualism. And all those things are massive contributors to collective mental distress.
Wow, that's a really direct line from a huge macroeconomic policy straight to, personal anxiety.
It is.
But how does it actually work? Like chronic exposure to something, structural poverty maybe, or discrimination, how does that physically get under the skin and increase the biological risk for mental health issues?
That's the key mechanism. Yeah. We need to understand that. So chronic exposure to these tough structural conditions, it triggers the body's stress response over and over. It keeps activating the HPA axis. That's our main stress system.
Right, the HPA axis.
And over time, this constant activation results in what researchers call allostatic load.
Allostatic load. Okay, that sounds pretty technical. Can you break that down? Like, what does that wear and tear actually look like?
Think of your body like a car engine that's constantly being revved into the red zone.
Okay.
If you're living with chronic uncertainty, financial stress, discrimination, your stress systems are basically always on high alert.
Right.
That sustained, kind of overwhelming physiological response creates wear and tear on the body and the brain. It actually links those structural inequities directly to biological consequences. It can impact brain development, neuroplasticity, even lead to epigenetic changes.
Wow. And the sources we looked at kept hammering this point. The mental health problems that result follow a really clear social gradient.
They absolutely do. Lower socioeconomic position consistently means a significantly higher burden of mental disorders. And importantly, this isn't about blaming individuals, saying they lack resilience.
No.
It's a direct result of unequal access to crucial resources. Things like safe housing, good education, healthcare. And that inequality is socially and politically created.
Right.
And there's a really striking finding here, too. The psychological hit from experiencing discrimination. It's reported to be even more strongly linked to poor mental health than it is to poor general physical health.
That's incredible.
Discrimination is like a structural poison specifically for the mind.
Okay, so if structural inequity is the core problem, let's pivot to the solutions. What policy interventions actually target these structures? Starting with that first pillar, economic security.
Right.
We know it's a two-way street, right? Mental illness creates economic burdens. But what's the evidence that giving people more money actually causes better mental health?
Well, the evidence does suggest a likely causal link there.
Oh,
There was one landmark analysis. It found that when an income increase actually lifts a person above the official poverty line,
yeah.
it's associated with a measurable improvement in mental health, about a 0.13 standard deviation effect size.
Okay. 0.13 standard deviation. Now, for our listeners, that might not sound huge, but in clinical terms, that's significant, isn't it?
It is significant.
Especially because it's coming purely from a change in income status.
Yeah.
That makes a pretty strong case for direct action like cash transfers.
Absolutely. It shows direct cash transfers can work. But then you get into things like UBI, Universal Basic Income. It's often pitched as the solution.
Right.
Is the evidence for its mental health impact as solid as those income stats might suggest?
Well, that's where it's really interesting, actually. A bit of a contradiction. When you look at the temporary UBI trials,
Okay.
they saw immediate mental health boosts in the first year. People felt better. But then often those improvements dramatically faded by the second year.
Hated. But the money was still coming in, wasn't it?
Exactly. But the transfers were heading towards their scheduled end date. And the key takeaway seems to be that the mental health benefit wasn't just from the cash itself, but from the security and predictability it offered initially.
Right, the stability.
Yeah. Once people realized the program was temporary, that uncertainty about the future, the what happens next question, it started creeping back in.
I see.
And the psychological distress started returning. It seems like you get diminishing returns if the security isn't guaranteed long term.
That is powerful. So it's the promise of a predictable future, not just the check itself that has the healing effect.
Seems that way.
Okay. Now let's look at another policy lever we argue about constantly: minimum wage increases.
Right. And here the evidence is really context dependent. It's not straightforward.
Okay.
So sources show that in the UK, when they introduced a national minimum wage, it actually reduced depressive symptoms for low-wage workers. And the effect size was comparable to common antidepressants.
Wow, comparable to medication. That sounds great.
It does, but then you have to compare that to the US data, which is, well, much more ambiguous. Mixed results.
How?
Sometimes the wage hike actually led to decreased health outcomes, especially if the policy seemed to cause job losses, perhaps for workers in smaller businesses who are already just hanging on.
Okay, so it's good for the workers who keep their jobs and get the raise,
Right.
but potentially bad for those who might lose their jobs because of it. The wider labor market context really matters.
Exactly. It mediates the outcome. And you see a similar kind of nuance when you compare different types of unemployment benefits.
Wow, interesting. How?
Well, entitlement-based benefits, the kind perceived as an earned right, maybe less stigma attached.
Yeah, like unemployment insurance sometimes.
Right. Those were associated with a long-term reduction in depression symptoms, particularly for women in the studies we saw. But then you look at means-tested welfare benefits,
Okay.
the kind that often require tons of paperwork, proof, conditionality. Those were actually associated with a higher likelihood of depression.
Whoa.
So the process itself can be harmful.
It seems so. That's a really stunning finding, isn't it? The administrative burden, the potential shame or stigma tied to means-tested programs. It can apparently wipe out the financial relief entirely.
Leaving the person potentially worse off mentally.
Yeah, it really suggests the structure of the support system is just as critical as the amount of money.
So the takeaway is that support should ideally be universal, unconditional maybe, and designed to preserve dignity.
That seems to be what the evidence points towards.
Okay, so if financial security is key, that leads us straight into the physical places we live, our built environment. Housing instability is obviously a massive stressor,
Foundational.
which is why the housing first model seems so important.
It's remarkably effective. And the concept is simple but radical. Provide immediate, unconditional housing for people experiencing chronic homelessness. You bypass the usual preconditions, like requiring sobriety or mandatory therapy first.
Just get people housed.
Right. And these Housing First programs, they boast incredible success rates, like an 88% housing retention rate after 5 years. That's compared to less than half, maybe 47%, in more traditional service models.
Huge difference.
And even simpler things matter too. Basic quality improvements in housing, better lighting, reliable heating, good maintenance. Those also show measurable mental health benefits.
But it's not always as simple as just changing someone's location, is it? The moving to opportunity demonstration, or MTO, that's a really critical cautionary tale here.
Oh, absolutely. A vital one for anyone thinking about structural policy.
Tell us about it.
So MTO moved low-income families from very high poverty neighborhoods to lower poverty areas. And for the adults, it seems successful. They reported less psychological distress. Same for girls. They reported fewer problems too.
Sounds good so far.
But here's the twist. Counterintuitively, it actually had a harmful effect on boys.
Harmful? How?
They showed increased distress, more behavior problems, engaging in more risky behaviors after the move.
Wow. So moving to a supposedly better neighborhood actually made things worse for teenage boys specifically.
That's what the data indicated.
What's the theory behind that? Such a devastating unintended consequence.
Well, the researchers hypothesized that while maybe girls benefited from escaping immediate neighborhood dangers, the boys might have suffered from a kind of double hit.
Okay.
First, the disruption, losing their established social networks, the friends and community ties that maybe gave them support or identity.
Right. That's social capital.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And second, the challenge of integrating into a new environment where they might face maybe increased implicit bias, social exclusion, perhaps even hostility from existing residents or peers. It really underscores that the built environment is deeply social. Just changing the physical address isn't enough if you disrupt those crucial social connections.
That makes the policy designer's job incredibly complex, doesn't it? You really need deep community input before making these kinds of structural changes.
Absolutely crucial.
Okay. Thinking more broadly about urban design, what choices generally benefit mental health?
Well, access to green and blue spaces, parks, gardens, waterfronts, that consistently pops up as reducing stress and depression.
Right. Nature connection.
But the key seems to be accessibility. One interesting finding was that psychological distress tended to be lower in areas with many small, easily accessible green spaces woven into the fabric of daily life.
So lots of little pocket parks might be better than one giant park you have to travel to.
Potentially, yes. Integration and ease of access seem really important for those daily stress reduction benefits.
Makes sense. And finally, in this segment, what about when the environment is defined by violence? What interventions can structurally reduce that community trauma?
Community Violence Intervention Programs, CVI, are a critical public health approach here.
Okay.
Programs like Baltimore Safe Streets, they employ what they call violence interrupters. These are often trusted community members, sometimes with lived experience themselves.
Yep.
And their job is to mediate disputes, step in before conflicts turn lethal. Rigorous evaluations show these programs work. By interrupting that cycle of violence, they reduce community trauma, chronic stress,
And save lives.
They led to an average reduction in shootings of about 23% in the areas where they operated.
That's significant. Okay, let's transition then to our final two pillars, education and the wider social fabric or community.
Right.
Schools seem like such key structural assets. They're a universal access point, right? Nearly 1 in 5 U.S. public school students actually uses school-based mental health services.
They're absolutely critical hubs. And the foundational structural element within schools seems to be the overall school climate.
School climate, meaning
the general sense of safety, fairness, belonging, positive relationships.
Yeah.
Basically, how the school feels to be in every day.
Okay.
And structural interventions that focus on improving that climate, things like fully integrating social and emotional learning, SEL, into the curriculum, or using restorative practices for discipline system-wide. Those show significant decreases in student depression, anxiety, and even suicidal ideation. It's about changing the whole environment.
And the sources we looked at contrasted that positive finding with more isolated educational efforts, didn't they?
They did. Things like standalone mental health literacy programs, just teaching kids about mental illness in a health class, they show pretty weak evidence for actually improving help-seeking behaviors.
Interesting. Why do you think that is?
Well, the implication is that the structural environment, how students feel treated, supported, and connected every single day, is just a much more powerful determinant of their well-being and behavior than isolated knowledge.
Right. You can know the resources exist.
Exactly. But if the school environment feels unsafe or uncaring, you're probably not going to reach out for help there anyway.
Okay. Shifting to the broader social fabric now. Let's talk about stigma. We usually think of stigma as like an individual attitude or belief.
Right. Prejudices.
But you're arguing it's also structural. How?
Well, structural stigma is when that bias gets embedded in actual institutional rules, laws, and policies.
Oh, okay.
And the evidence for policy being a powerful preventative force against stigma's harms is quite strong. For example, studies found that U.S. states with more laws protecting sexual and gender minority people, anti-discrimination laws, those states actually have lower rates of depression and anxiety among their SGM residents.
Wow. So the law itself offers a kind of psychological protection.
It seems to act as a buffer against the stress of potential discrimination. It shows policy change is one of the biggest, most large-scale anti-stigma tools we have.
That's a really direct link. Now, beyond formal legislation, what about community-led solutions? The sources mention some non-clinical approaches that seem effective.
Yeah, and these are often really successful precisely because they aren't framed as mental health treatment. They boost social connection and purpose as a kind of positive side effect, which avoids the stigma sometimes associated with direct therapy.
Can you give some examples?
Sure, think about the men's sheds movement, which is popular in places like Australia, Ireland, the UK.
Men's shed.
Yeah, they're basically non-clinical community workshops. Often older, retired men gather for activities like woodworking, repairing things, skill sharing,
Okay.
and participants consistently report feeling a renewed sense of purpose, less isolation, better well-being. Another great example is community gardens.
Right. I've seen those.
They reduce stress, get people outdoors, but crucially, they build neighborhood trust and social interaction. They rebuild that social fabric.
And for more structured, maybe targeted community interventions, the nurse-family partnership really stood out in the research.
Oh, it's a remarkable program, NFP. It's a home visiting program specifically for low-income, first-time mothers.
Yeah.
Nurses provide support during pregnancy and the first couple years of the child's life, and rigorous trials show it improves the mother's own mental health outcomes.
Which is huge in itself.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
But critically, it also leads to a long-term, measured at age 67% reduction in the child's behavioral and emotional problems.
67%. That's incredible.
It really is. It shows how investing in the parent's mental health and support structure creates this positive ripple effect, a structural impact on the child's entire life trajectory.
Okay. So, pulling all these threads together, what does this synthesis of evidence really tell us?
Right.
It seems like we have a roadmap across multiple sectors for creating a more mentally healthy society.
We do. The evidence points that way.
But actually implementing this kind of structural shift means tackling some massive cross-cutting challenges, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And maybe the most pervasive one right now is the climate crisis.
Right.
Yeah.
Climate change as a structural determinant of mental health.
It's perhaps the ultimate one. It causes acute trauma, obviously PTSD from climate-related disasters like floods, wildfires.
Yeah.
But it also fuels this chronic underlying psychological distress. We're seeing this with terms like eco-anxiety, especially in young people, and also solastalgia.
Solastalgia, can you define that one for us?
It's this deep sense of distress or grief people feel when their cherished home environment is degraded or fundamentally changed by environmental forces, like those driven by climate change.
Yeah.
Losing that sense of place.
Wow. That sounds profound.
It is. And our policy responses really need to catch up, recognizing that climate adaptation, mitigation, these are now fundamental mental health necessities.
Another huge macro level challenge is the digital world, isn't it? Digital mental health interventions, DMHIs, they promise so much access.
Huge potential, yes.
But our sources raise a serious warning flag about tech equity.
Equity, right. Equity in technology access and use.
Explain that.
So the problem is the digital divide. Lack of reliable broadband internet, lack of devices, lack of the skills or literacy to use the tech effectively. It means the most vulnerable populations, often the ones who could benefit most, are the ones most likely to be excluded from these digital health solutions.
So instead of closing gaps, it could actually widen existing health disparities.
That's the major risk, yes. Achieving mental health equity in this digital age, it really requires a structural policy approach. We need to start treating broadband access like an essential public utility.
Like water or electricity.
Exactly.
Okay. So the ultimate policy hurdle, then, wrapping this all up, it seems to be generating the sustained political will. The will to move beyond just individual treatment and truly embrace this massive, system-wide mental health and all policies approach.
That really is the goal. It means systematically asking for every major government decision, whether it's about housing density, labor laws, transportation, infrastructure, asking, what are the likely mental health impacts of this policy?
And that requires pushing back against
significant political inertia.
Yeah.
And powerful vested interests that often benefit from the way things are now.
So maybe to leave our listeners with a final provocative thought, thinking about implementation, getting from this evidence to actual sustainable structural programs, it takes political courage, obviously, but also really smart advocacy. And historically, if you look back, major progress, like the U.S. National Mental Health Act back in 1946, It often happened when advocates successfully framed mental health not just as a social issue on its own,
Right.
but as central to achieving other core national priorities, like maybe national security after the war or economic prosperity.
Linking it to other goals.
Exactly. So maybe for this next generation of structural reforms, the challenge is simpler, but maybe harder too. We just have to advocate for mental health itself as the central ultimate outcome of what a truly just and equitable society looks like.
A fundamental measure of societal success.
First.